Hello everyone. So again, welcome back to the latest lecture session. Let's jump right in. I guess we were talking about what do we say, the adverse impact of over expansion of humans, let's say, right? And in this context, we are talking about how while the human race accounts for just 0.01% of life on earth, I guess with respect to biomass, right? Our footprint is such that we are more or less leading to extinction of other forms of life. And in that context, just some data, we looked at this. So, where are we now? 82% plants, 13% bacteria, and I guess here we are, this tiny speck out here, right? And with respect to where are we now, obviously most of it on land, but let me skip this. And I guess here we have some data, as in for all the mammals on earth, 96% are livestock and humans, right? And in this context, what do we see now? Only 4% are wild animals, while 60% are, what do we say, mammals that are reared for, what do we say, human consumption, let's say, either for dairy or for meat, right? So that's a remarkable number, something to keep in mind. Of 96% are livestock and humans, right? And that's something to keep in mind. So 0.1% we destroyed 83% of wild mammals in the last century. And here is a picture, I guess, where is this from? From Brazil, if I am not wrong. Yes, Brazil. And here's a cattle farm. So cattle farm, what are the issues now? Obviously greenhouse gas emissions, that's something that we talked about, and if not, cattle farm, we had poultry farms, leading to release of different kinds of viruses in the past, that transmitted from what do we say, animals to humans. These were some of the repositories where they reside in, the viruses. That's something to keep in mind. Yes, and obviously what are we doing here? We are felling forests. Remarkable number of forests are felled to be able to house these what do we say, cattle. And more importantly, the cattle need a source of protein, right? As in, why do humans eat the what do we say, either poultry or cattle or so on and so forth. Beef and pork, why is it? That's for protein, right? And you need a source of protein for the what do we say, cattle. And where does that come from? It comes from soy farms. And to grow these soy farms, remarkable levels of deforestation is taking place. And I guess recently with the change in government, the Amazonian forest, they are being felled at a rate, I think I talked about 10 or 6 football fields per second or minute. So that's the these are the other adverse effects, let's say, right? You are going to have knock-on effects. So let's move on. And here again our impact, 70% of all birds are either chicken or other poultry, and only 30% are wild. Again, you see the what do we say, footprint, human footprint. And here is some holistic data. 83% of the wild animals have been lost. Again, this is since a rise of human civilization, but more or less since the last 200 or 250 years, if I may say so, right? 80% of marine mammals, right? 50% of plants, thus is a remarkable tragedy in itself, and 15% of fish, and this is increasing remarkably now. So we see that the human impact is across all spheres, right? So here again, as we see, we have what do we say, some data here. Here we have information that insects, spiders account for more than 17 times the biomass as that of the humans. So why is this important now? As we discussed, biodiversity is remarkably important now. Well, I guess biodiversity, there are different definitions, but I was reading an article where the author mentioned that anyway, his opinion was that if we look at it philosophically, what is biodiversity now? It's how did life thrive? All life. We have certain conditions, environmental conditions on earth, right? And over time, let's say over billions, or not billions, let's say over thousands of years, the different forms of life have learned how to live in coexistence to be able to survive on this particular planet. So more or less, when we talk about biodiversity, we are talking about repository of knowledge that has been gained or gleaned over millions of years. So when we say a certain species has been lost, or let's say, we are losing, what is it now? 80% of mammals, let us say, or 85% of mammals. What does that mean? The way of life, or how life where we were interdependent or codependent with each other, let us say, has been lost. That knowledge has been lost forever. So, we do not yet know what the effects are, right, or because we have never experienced this on this scale. But as we mentioned earlier, there were 5 mass extinctions, and now we are experiencing the 6th mass extinction, and that mass extinction is with respect to the insects now. And why are they important, I guess, right? Again, as we discussed, I believe we discussed, we have building blocks of life, and every particular species plays a particular role. Some are obvious, as in plants give out oxygen, we consume oxygen, carbon dioxide released, again plants use carbon dioxide during photosynthesis, so on and so forth. But there are obviously less obvious overlap or interdependence, if I may say so, right. One example, I guess, I came across is that in the Amazonian forest, where you have these huge jungles or forests and a specific kind of tree that acts as a storehouse for carbon dioxide. Looks like the seeds for that particular tree are dispersed by a huge fruit eating orangutan or monkey, let us say, not monkey, the species of monkeys, let us say, right. So, again, they come about later now, and once we destroy these species, there is never going back, right. It will rarely recover, if ever, I guess, right. So, that is something to keep in mind. In this context, rather than me trying to impress upon you the need for biodiversity or to have different forms of life thriving, which will also allow us to have meaningful and sustainable life on this earth, right. I would like to show you a video, and I guess I would this is on YouTube. Okay, here is the link. I have the link here. So, again, as I mentioned, YouTube, and I guess here are the hashtags. This is the channel, and the title, I request that you go through this title, how wolves change rivers, let us say, right. I believe I have it here. So, here it is. So, as you just looked at it, you see how an experiment, I guess it started out as being an experiment. Introduced, or they introduced the predators into this national park, and you saw the remarkable effects, right. I mean, first on the lower levels of the food chain, and how that changed the nature itself and the course that the rivers took, right. And again, it is a remarkable example, but again keep in mind that this is but one example that people have looked into. Just because we haven't looked into or haven't come across or haven't been able to research the knock-on effects in detail, doesn't mean there is no such interdependence of life. There is, and in this context, Netflix, I guess, has done a remarkable job, and the series that I am referring to is called Our Planet. Again, made possible due to the efforts of Netflix. It is narrated by David Attenborough, right, and I guess it is a 6-episode series now, each of I think 50 minutes or so, and I request that in your free time you go through the 6-part series. It is going to be remarkably worthwhile or enriching. I am sure most of you are spending considerable time on the internet, and whenever you feel like, I would certainly suggest that you go through this, right. But one aspect I want you to look at now is, as I mentioned, there are 6 episodes, and one of those episodes is called Coastal Seas. I request you to, or we will now go through this particular section in that particular video. It is from 16 minutes to 28 minutes 30 seconds, right. And one aspect here is, Netflix, for different reasons, has made this available on YouTube now, right. This has been made available on YouTube. You can just search for Our Planet. Again, as I mentioned, it is a 6-episode series, let us say, and it is remarkably well made, and there are insights which I guess only you have to look at and to understand, rather than me trying to describe that in broken words, let us say, right. So, let us just look at that particular video now. As I mentioned, here we have this Our Planet series, and they made available here, right. Here are the 6 episodes out here. Full episodes, again, as I say, rarely does Netflix ever put them out, And one aspect to keep in mind is after Netflix released this, there has been a remarkable surge in what can I say, awareness in Europe and US too, and I guess to some extent in India too, right. Again, that's something to keep in mind. The series did bring about what do we say, considerable practical change. Why is that? The people who were now more aware, again keep in mind this came during the time of the corona crisis too. It gained more popularity during corona crisis, even though it was released I guess in March 19, 2019. People really started trying to look around for different sources of entertainment, and some people landed on this, and I believe at least that's how I did. I came across this. But let's get back to what we are trying to discuss. So 16 minutes, let's just look at the interdependence of life here. Okay. So as you have just saw, again we came across another example where you have different kinds of species keeping that fine balance of life going on Earth, right? And if you pick out or loosen some of the nuts and bolts and lose them, let's say, you are going to have life crashing down, right? Or life as we know it, it's going to come crashing down, and the planet is not going to be sustainable. Again, we talk about global warming. Yes, warming itself, as you saw, temperature, effects of temperature itself, and then another aspect is carbon dioxide increasing in the gaseous phase. So that will change the equilibrium between the carbon dioxide in the gaseous phase and carbon dioxide in the aqueous phase. So you are going to have H2CO3 or increasing levels of H2CO3 because of carbon dioxide transfer from gaseous to aqueous phase. The pH of the oceans comes down by, let's say, 0.1, 2 or 3 units, and the ocean waters become more acidic, and again you are going to have relevant issues. Again, in this context, you looked at again the interdependence of different species, effects of global warming, effects of what do we say, pH change of the oceans, and so on and so forth. So that's something to keep in mind. Again, biodiversity, right? It's remarkably important now. Or one example I guess I would like to give out in this particular period is that when the corona crisis or corona induced lockdown was thrust upon us, most people were, again, as most people are, as society is bound to or typically react, most people what do we say, reacted with fear, and they obviously asked the maids and their servants and so on and so forth, the construction workers, different what do we say, people who are essential to let us live our lives relatively freely, if I may say so, right, to see to it that our life functions smoothly. They were asked to what do we say, stay away from us now. Well, that was feasible for us or most of us for, let's say, 1 month, 2 month period. But during this 2 month period, they were the maids and such, they were not paid, at least most of them were not paid their what do we say, monthly allowance, let's say, right. And what happens to them? They can't live without what do we say, money for a whole month or food for a few days, right. And I know personally of people in and around Roorkee, let's say, facing remarkable what do we say, levels of hunger. Well, the government did try, but again keep in mind that the government can't help everyone out there, right. So what happened now is that when the people wanted the servants and maids back, because obviously we, most of us, we won't bend our back and clean our homes, and now that we want our life to get back on track as usual, there are no more what do we say, maids available. Most of them have left back for their villages, or most of the construction workers and such, they went back to their villages now. So though we do not pay as much attention to different what do we say, people engaged in different forms of labor, they play a remarkable role in the smooth running of either the country or the life itself, or our life itself. And similarly here, I'm talking about I'm trying to draw an analogy with biodiversity. Just because things are going smoothly and we pick out what do we say, different species because they seem to be what do we say, irrelevant to us right now, the knock-on effects are going to be remarkably what do we say, adverse, right. That's something to keep in mind. Again, biodiversity, we are all in it together, both humans and different forms of life. So in this context, some data. So here we are talking about the 6th mass extinction, I guess, right. And what do we have here? Plummeting insect numbers threaten collapse of nature itself. Again, typically we come across number of lions having decreased, number of elephants having decreased, cheetahs and so on and so forth. because they are national symbols, let's say, or so on and so forth, and it's also easier to look at or count or predict the number of what do we say, mammals, let's say. But with respect to insects, only now do we start having what do we say, more and more data. But we have always known that insects play a remarkable role in keeping this what do we say, nature or world running smoothly, let's say, right. But again, I am not going to go into the examples now. So the rate of insect extinction is 8 times faster than that of mammals, birds and reptiles. Again, different reasons. One, certainly remarkable what do we say, changes in temperature, right, remarkably hot, remarkably cold temperatures and so on and so forth. Another aspect is that human impact, let's say, or footprint, it has gone into areas, let's say, or it has expanded now, and you do need land, right, where these biodiversity hotspots can thrive. Well, we do not have many left, and that is one of the reasons now why the insects, which are more or less like the soldiers, if I can say, of nature, let's say, they are now getting extinct, let's say, right. So that is something that we have to keep in mind, and here we have some data. So 41% of global insect species have declined over the past decade. So that is something to keep in mind. This is within the past decade. Again, as I mentioned, the articles that I am referring to are from the Guardian. Again, I am not going to repeat why I look at it or such, but again, keep in mind this sixth mass extinction, as some of the scientists are calling it, and all this data that we have, it obviously was not collected by the Guardian, but they compiled it and presented it in a very what do we say, user friendly way, let's say, right, easy to communicate or easy to understand. You can look at Stanford or MIT, I guess they also did or were part of this holistic study, if I am not wrong. Again, let us come back to what we have here. So all insects, what do we have here? Again, as we have it here, 41% loss, endangered greater than 50% loss, threatened, in decline, let us say, right. But with respect to some particular species, obviously more than 50%, right. But where are the bees, right? These are again remarkably important, and you see almost 50% or 46% loss of bees. And with respect to those with vertebrae, let us say, I guess what is it now, all, if we have take all the vertebrae, how many are extinct now, or have declined, pardon me, not extinct, 22%. Birds by 26, amphibians, land mammals and reptiles. But again, keep in mind that this data is with respect to the last decade though. But in the last decade, we see that remarkable numbers of what do we say, insects have, or the insect numbers have declined what do we say, alarmingly, and quite a few species have been lost. Here I guess we do say endangered, greater than 50% loss, but there are still considerable what do we say, numbers of species which have gone extinct now. That is something to be really alarmed about. And insect abundance has fallen by 75% over the last 27 years. So here we have it, over 75% in the last 25 or 27 years. Right here again, you see the data again, exponential decrease out here. So what is going to happen in the foreseeable future, and what kind of effects it is going to have on the global what do we say, food production chains, let us say, that is a question that I guess we only need to what do we say, wait and watch out for, I guess, right. Right now it is anybody's guess how severe the adverse impact is going to be. There is going to be an impact, but how severe is it going to be, that is something that we have to see. So human impact, again the article I guess is out here. Humanity has wiped out 60% of animal population since 1970. As I said, the loss itself is a tragedy, but more importantly it threatens the survival of the civilization, survival of life on earth itself, right. Again, interdependence of life, we are dependent on different forms of life, much more than we typically know and acknowledge, but that is what do we see here. By humans not paying attention to it, we see remarkable decrease. Again, what do we have here? And since 1970, 60% of the world's vertebrate animals have been wiped out, percentage change in population, and freshwater habitats are the worst hit, with populations having collapsed by 83%. I guess one example with respect to Indian crocodiles, freshwater habitats, well, near extinction more or less, and South and Central America is the worst affected region globally, I guess. And what is it like? 89% total drop. So again, we have exponential levels of decrease in most kinds of species, and certainly in insects, right. So, let us move on. The biggest cause of wildlife losses is the destruction of natural habitat. Again, this is due to increasing human footprint, that is something we discussed. One example was the Amazonian forests, right. They are called the lungs of earth, and much of it to create farmland. As I mentioned, or as we discussed earlier, farmland, it is not just about what you say growing crops, it is also about growing those crops to feed, like again, cattle and such, typically soy, and that leads to remarkable change in land use, and again with respect to carbon dioxide emissions too, right. 3/4 of all land on earth is now significantly affected by human activities. 3/4 of all land. Again, keep in mind, I think our biomass was only just 0.1%, right. And killing for food is the next biggest cause. 300 mammal species are being eaten into extinction, right, while the oceans are massively overfished, with more than half now being industrially fished. Well, there is a difference between general fishing and industrial fishing. Typically industrial fishing, it is not sustainable. Again, I am not going to go into that in detail, but here you have a good enough what do we say graphic here, right. What do we have here? Here we have global fishing activity. Again, the article is given out here. Half of the world's oceans are now fished industrially, and what do we have? Data gathered from more than 70,000 vessels shows that commercial fishing now covers a greater surface area than agriculture. So, they looked at what do we say now 70,000 what do we say fishing vessels, and what do you see? Obviously, hotspots near those countries that what do we say consume more fish, right. But what do you see? You see that almost all the oceans are more or less industrially fished, let us say, right. Then that is something to keep in mind, right. You are going to, as in you just looked at the videos, you saw how again life in the oceans is also going to play a remarkable role in affecting life on land. And here we see that we are trawling, or we are fishing remarkably extensively, unsustainably, and again where is this going to lead to, or what are the adverse effects, or how severe are the adverse effects rather, are going to be an issue. And obviously, which are the countries now? Obviously, China, as we saw earlier, right. We saw this out here along the Chinese coast. Millions of hours of fishing by top fishing nations. This is in 2016. Taiwan, Spain, mostly the European countries, Japan, let us say, Russia, UK, US, and so on and so forth, let us say, right. So, again I am just trying to point out some of the aspects, let us say, which we do not typically discuss, but which do play a remarkable role, and we are going to look at what you can do. So, then I guess some of these aspects are going to come back into play, but in general more aware citizen is always better. You are, as I mentioned, going to play different roles in life later on, and the hope is that being a relatively more what we say a citizen who is relatively more knowledgeable, you will be able to take decisions that can improve our lives for the better, right. So, again one other aspect here, I talked about the Amazonian forests and lungs, and they being the lungs of the forest. What do we have here? Brazil's forgotten state oil agribusiness threatens Amapá forests, right. And here again, what do we see? Nearly 90% of Brazil's state is unexplored and protected rainforest, right. But once a large dam has been built, one large dam has been built in Amapá, destroying hundreds of square kilometers of forest, and many small and medium sized dams are planned now. The energy generated goes to the grid, and rural people in the state have little or no electricity. Again, this is the crux of the issue. People obviously want to have economic development, right. Everyone wants their what is it now standard of life to improve. But as I think anyway, let me not use names here, I guess they are no more in vogue now. The world has enough for everyone's need, but not enough for everyone's greed, I guess, right. And that is the stage we are at, or rather we have passed, and that is what we see out here, right. Again, as I mentioned, these are the lungs of the world now, the whole world. And again, but obviously the people there, they want to also reap the benefits, if I may say so, but do they really end up or directly benefiting from what do we say the destruction of forests? Not really. They play a small role in that huge economic chain, and some guy sitting in some offices, I guess, or some office far distant from where these poor people are, he ends up getting richer by maybe hundreds of crores and so on and so forth. right. That is something to keep in mind. Let me not digress out here. And again, large areas of savanna have been turned into fast growing eucalyptus forests in the past decade to provide Japanese and European paper to provide for the Japanese and European paper making industries. Again, all this is from the Guardian, right. It is easy for you to look at it. I guess I have had the link out here. Here you see the natural jungles or forests, and here you see these what do we say, eucalyptus forests. And it might look like to you or to me, or a person just looking at it, right, it might look like there isn't a great deal of difference in tree cover, but that is not the key aspect. Here we are losing the biodiversity again, and typically these forests have, let us say these kinds, not forests, pardon me, or let us say these eucalyptus forests, where the human footprint sees to it that you do not have the typical biodiversity that you want. Let us say you will not have the undergrowth, let us say you will not have the plants that feed off these major species out here. They have less carbon dioxide storage capacity, or remarkably less. That is not the case with respect to these jungles that have developed over time, where biodiversity is remarkable and you have interdependence of life and different life forms feeding off each other, let us say, right. So, that is something to keep in mind, that is a critically important aspect here. And since a Brazilian government moratorium was declared on new soya planting south of the Amazon, this particular state has become the new frontier for global agribusiness. Its rapid expansion threatens protected land and forests and has attracted speculators and fueled land grabbing. As I mentioned, what is it now, 10 football fields per second or minute, let me look up the data the next time I come back, right, are being lost. Again, whose job is it to protect it? I, as an Indian, or the Indian government has has no, what do we say, leeway or leverage, let us say, at least legally, about what is going on in what is it now, Brazil, let us say. But what happens in Brazil or what happens in India will affect the other people too in different ways, some more severely, some maybe relatively less severely now. But I guess with respect to the Brazilian government, you now have a more right wing and populist president, and he does not, at least I guess there might be some blowback on me due to what I am saying now, but you can look at the data. Typically people who do not believe in science, let us say, who think most of it is fake news or fake data, are now in power. And lobbyists, let us say, are the person who would get rich from, what do we say, agribusiness. He is in a position of power in the environment, what do we say, Ministry of Environment now. So, what do? They typically turn a blind eye towards the destruction of nature now. And once that starts going, and people are given a relatively free hand, or the enforcement authorities turn a blind eye, you can't put the cat back in the bag, right. So, that is what is happening out there now. And here you see, this is a great picture that gives you an idea about the scale, right, land grabbing, soy farming, and so on and so forth, the wide scale destruction of what do we say, the Amazonian forest, let us see, again mostly for soy, and soy for animals and animals for humans, I guess, right. And also large and small scale gold, iron ore and manganese mining in the state drives roads into the pristine forest, attracts miners and devastates the land. Again, here you have an open cast mine, if I may say so. Again, remarkable levels of destruction, again mining, depending on whether you have pyrite or not, right. You are going to have remarkably acidic acid mine drainage. Other than the pH being very, very low, you are going to have metals that are relatively more soluble at this low pH, and all this acid mine drainage is going to what do we say, pollute the groundwater, leading to effects not just on the human population, but in general the forests around that particular mine too. Again, who cares or who can stop, I guess, is the issue. And here you see water pollution from mining is now a chronic problem. Keep in mind, this is also an issue in India, but the adverse effects of mining in an area like the Amazonian forest, or in this case in the Amapá state, I guess, are remarkably high. And what do we see? We see dangerous levels of mercury hundreds of miles from the mines, and fish catches being affected, right. This is the typical state out there. So, how do or what can you do immediately, let us say, to reduce carbon footprint? Again, as I mentioned something earlier, we talked about the impact of aviation, right, being remarkably high with respect to greenhouse gas emissions. and then we talked about unsustainability, and then we talked about land use change and how most of the land on earth is being used for, what do we say, delivering food to humans now, right. So, let us see what you can do, or I guess it's we are almost out of time. So, I will continue this in the next session. So, I guess with that I will end today's session, and thank you.